feature presentation.
Welcome back to The Cast of Us, an untitled HBO The Last of Us podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's not allergic to mushrooms, but he is, I was going to say mushroom meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Could you imagine that? I mean, like, who would be the
The
top?
mushroom meter?
The mushroom meter?
Eric, it's definitely not, 2 years later. It's definitely still 2023 as we're recording this. It's only been 1 week since episode 7 of season 1 of The Last of Us. How are you doing?
Well, I mean, how was you're not going to Florida yet, are you?
Oh yeah. No, yeah. I just got back from
Yeah.
Florida. Yeah, I went to Orlando with my family. It is
Smooth, right?
February of 2023. That's 100%. Yeah. No, I said we weren't going to reference this, but yes, we are back, and I just want to kind of explain our absence very quickly. There might even be some people who are jumping in, not even realizing this, depending on when you're listening to this. Eric and I did this little show called The Cast of Us, where we did episode recaps of HBO The Last of Us during its first season. Then in February of 2023, we did episode 7. I went to Florida. I got back from Florida and then had a mental breakdown. I'm very okay now. I'm in a good headspace. We took a hiatus from this show and our main show, the Untitled Movie Podcast.
Please, I never left.
Yeah, you never left, but I did take a little bit of a leave of absence, and then this show kind of unfortunately got kind of put on the back burner because season 1 of The Last of Us had ended. I wasn't in the right headspace to do anything, and then it always was something where like, hey, we should go back to that, because like I really enjoyed doing those first 7 episodes. I think it was one of our most popular shows because we were very hyper focused on one show that both I really loved from the video game, and you were coming in fresh, not having played the game at all. And it was always something like, we should do that. We should do it before it wins its Emmys, or we should do it during this time. And then like it never happened. And now we were like, all right, The Last of Us is returning for season 2. I'm like, let's go back and do these final 2 episodes of season 1 and continue it with season 2. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We will be reviewing and recapping episode 8 of season 1 of The Last of Us. And I'm excited to be back. That's my little intro, Eric. How have you been these last couple years for people who don't listen to our other show?
Well, you know what? Pretty much stayed the course, doing a lot of reviews. My grandfather died. That was great.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So life in general, I think it's one of those situations where
I went back to school.
Yeah.
Like lots of shit has happened.
We've grown since then, like a fungus, and spread our whatever they grow.
And we're just being your method, right? Because there is going to be a 5-year gap in between seasons 1 and seasons 2 of The Last of Us. That's not a spoiler, but we'll get there when we get there. But
we needed to take the time to get ready for the electric state.
Yeah.
And what that movie had to give us, in combination with the Russo brothers revealing the cast of Avengers Doomsday. So that's, we're looking
these are
at
all dating this episode now, and now it's not timeless at all. It's definitely not March 5th, 2023 as we're recording this. Okay, episode 8, When We Are in Need, directed by Ali Abbasi, who definitely had not directed The Apprentice.
Had got in trouble with sexual assaults and other things. So, wow. Funny how time works.
Yes. So anyways, we'll leave that there. So, but yes, he does direct episodes 8 and 9. So episode 7, like we said, it's been a few years for us, but I'm very familiar with the game and the show. I've watched the show now 2 or 3 times all the way through. Episode 7 ended with Joel getting injured, I believe, at the school.
He was stabbed
at the university with Ellie. You seemingly don't know if Joel survived or is killed in that moment. And then that's kind of the cliffhanger at the end of episode 7, I believe. Do we see Ellie at the end of, or she's like kind of tending to Joel at the end, and you don't know if he's going to survive?
Yeah, well,
So,
she's kind of trying to get out of the situation because you still have other members of this unidentified group that we don't know who they are yet.
mhm.
Also at this school lab testing site, and she's getting out of there, and so I think she's right now searching for cover and trying to figure out like what the next step is because they're on their way to the Fireflies at this point.
Exactly. So this episode begins kind of in a snowy kind of a town. We see kind of a group of survivors in this kind of makeshift. It's a resort that they're staying at. They're kind of in a lodge at the beginning. Um, and we see a man named David, played by, is it Scott Shepherd?
Scott Shepherd, yeah, character
Scott
actor
Shepherd.
Scott Shepherd, yep.
Playing David, who is kind of a religious figure to them, kind of almost like a pastor or kind of a preacher, who's reading kind of scripture to these people. We see kind of his second in command, James, who is played by Troy Baker, who is actually the original voice of Joel from The Last of Us video game. Yeah, there's kind of these heavy religious kind of undertones in this sequence. And then we get the details of that. A girl and I think her mother and a young girl are grieving their father, who was recently killed, and kind of David, kind of deflects away from their thing. So we're introduced to this new set of characters. I kind of really like this of it. It's not necessarily a bottle episode like the episode 3, but I do like that it's kind of feels self-contained. Like this arc in the game, because the game kind of takes its time and takes a lot longer, doesn't feel as maybe short as this episode, but I kind of like how much they kind of, from start to beginning give you David's story and those survivors in this episode. So we kind of see them talking about how these men went out to go look for deer and never came back. And ultimately they realized that they were killed, and that they're kind of struggling to find food at this time. Right, Eric?
Yeah, it's all about famine, right? Like Scott
Yeah.
Shepherd's creepy clergyman will send chills down your spine. And you as you find out in the story that he used to be a teacher, he wasn't always someone that was, devoted to worship or God, but he's kind of manipulating his flock. And it's in the time of famine, so they're hungry, they're desperate, they're in this kind of state of pain. It's become a kind of cult commune situation, and it does feel somewhat episodic within the show, where it's like
Mhm.
another adventure that mostly Ellie has in this episode, because
Yeah.
Joel is sick. He is basically
Has an
trying.
infection from his
Yeah,
stab
and
wound.
so
Yeah.
she's trying to look for medicine and figure out like what to do next, and if she has to do this alone or does she go back to find Tommy. Like these are all things that she's considering at this moment, and the two paths of these of Ellie and also these other characters that were introduced in the beginning of the episode collide when they're
Mhm.
hunting for a deer. And how
Mhm.
that plays out. There's this kind of interesting back and forth between Scott Shepherd and Bella Ramsey's characters, where they're basically testing each other and seeing who's the more dominant force, and it becomes kind of a dialogue or a game of manipulation, and how Ellie can get what she needs, and she's a little bit more forthright about what she wants, and it's
Yeah.
stern. But David, you can tell, is trying to be both friendly and inviting in the way that a minister or a priest would be, but there's something about the way
Yeah.
that Scott Shepherd plays it where you can tell also it's very unnerving, and you just kind of feel completely unsettled by him. And I think Scott Shepherd is one of those great character actors that can play, like, most recently he was in Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. He played DiCaprio's brother in
Oh,
that,
right.
and he was in Bridge of Spies. He's worked with a ton of really great filmmakers, and he's
Yeah.
always kind of like authoritarian sort of figures within those worlds. Even Kelly Reichardt's first cow, he's got a really interesting kind of face and almost like a folksy kind of vibe to him, but then also he can be someone like, you can put him in a suit and he can be a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
Here he plays kind of like the last vestige of, like sanity slowly sinking into, this kind of darker terrain and kind of being more impulsive and giving into, the darker side of human nature. And
Yeah.
as we are discovering, it's basically a story about cannibals.
Yes.
Some
And
people
that's
know, some people don't within the community, and that's
yeah,
the
and it's
story.
and even watching this now the third time and knowing from the game, and I kind of knew all that stuff going in, and it's really kind of fun to see the subtle character moments where they slowly reveal that with, even Troy Baker's James, kind of the look he gives him when they talk about why can't you bury the dad and all that kind of stuff is like, which
Because we
gets
got to
revealed
eat them.
later. Yeah. So yeah, and I like what you mentioned about it being kind of an Ellie episode, and this is kind of her fucked up coming of age moment in the series, right? Because all the time before this, she's always relied on Joel, right? Like she was always, this is kind of her, becoming, it sounds gross, but like becoming a woman moment in the sense of her, or an adult kind of, even though she's still a teenager, because she has to kind of fend for herself and use everything she's kind of learned from Joel. And now she cares about him, and they develop this relationship where she wants to save him, and she doesn't know if she can do it on her own. And she kind of has to go through this thing with David on her own throughout the whole thing. So I think that's really interesting from Ellie's perspective. We're finally kind of, she has to go do this without Joel, which I think is really interesting.
She
So
has
yeah,
to
to
have
pick it
faith
up.
in herself
Yes,
versus
exactly.
faith in one man.
Yes,
Like that's
exactly.
the story, or the conflict here between both David and Ellie, right?
Yeah.
It's faith in the individual, it's faith in, yourself, but then it's like putting your faith in someone to lead you to prosperity or safety is something that is, it can be very vulnerable. It can be, a gamble in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think with this community, even though they know that David can be abusive, as we see in that first scene, and how we see, like, the one girl still crying about her father and how he treats her in front of everybody, there's still that feeling of like, oh, well, we have picked this person to be our representative, our leader, and nobody is going to say anything because they're afraid.
Yeah.
What does that sound like to you?
Mm-hmm. So to jump back, we pick up with Ellie kind of tending to Joel's wounds in the basement of this house that she's kind of hiding out in. So Joel did survive. He seems to be on death's door. He's got this infection in his kind of his abdomen. Ellie doesn't know what to do, but she knows that she has to go out and get food for herself, but also to try and keep Joel alive as well. So she goes out and hunts a deer. So she tracks the deer, shoots the deer. And then that's where, after she tracks the deer, after she shot it, she meets up with James and David. So they kind of collide in this moment where James and David see the wounded deer and they're going to take it. But then Ellie confronts them. And another thing you mentioned of the back and forth between Ellie and David in this moment, I think it's interesting because you can also tell that Ellie's not quite comfortable with all of this yet either. Like you can kind of tell in Bella Ramsey's performance, it feels um like she's putting on a little bit. Like I don't know if she actually believes she's tough in these moments or has to act tough. And even the way that she delivers a lot of these lines, I kind of see it as someone who's a bit of a poser in those moments, but has learned that you kind of have to do this to kind of survive in this world. And
Well, the character's feeling it out, right? Like
yeah,
the character is realizing in this moment, Ellie is realizing that this is a fight or flight kind of situation. And to everything you were saying before, where, she's learned all this stuff from Joel as they've, made this trek. And now she has to take what she's learned and what she, is thinking about this way and having to apply it in a real world situation. And being on your own, you don't have anybody else to rely on, and every move you make could be life or death. It's
Yeah.
a survival situation. It's basically, every decision you make will have consequences or ramifications to, that choice. And so she's feeling out the scene while the character is keeping her guard up. And what I like about the performance in that scene and what, they're doing is how we see, a kind of, a sternness in that this character knows exactly what is needed and what the character has to do in this situation, and is get the medicine
Yeah.
and, save
Well, it
as
immediately clicks for her when she sees other people that they
yes.
might have this to trade, right?
Yes. So, the character knows exactly what's on the line, is that Joel, his life hangs in the balance, and it probably, the more time she spends talking or bargaining, the less chance that Joel could pull through. And so, like every, word, every moment you take, it just lessens the chance of someone making it through a
Yeah.
situation, especially in this, it's cold, it's, the infection isn't being treated by anything. So the more time you spend, the less you have on actually, saving someone. So I think the characters, principles and what they're trying to do is there. It's just more
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
like this is the first time that this character, like you were saying,
Just had to do this, right? So
on their own.
exactly. So that's what I mean by the kind of the confidence is it feels shaky a little bit, but then also she, like you just said, knows what she needs to do and has to kind of say it no matter what. So yeah, she bargains with David and James saying, I will give you this deer if you get me some medicine. So David says that they have penicillin back at the camp that they're staying at, or the resort that they're at. So he sends James to go get the penicillin and then waits there with Ellie. David mentions that it's going to take, it's 4 miles, I think he says, each way. So it's going to take a while for James to go back and come back. So he goes, why don't we go inside this, I think this cabin that is nearby and take the deer. And he has a lantern and can start a fire or something like that. So they go inside. David and Ellie, Ellie still has the gun. She takes all the bullets out of their guns and is sitting with her gun on her lap talking to David. They kind of have this conversation back and forth. Like you mentioned, they're kind of feeling each other out, sort of, I think, in this moment. You've already kind of described it.
And what
And
makes
then,
David so dangerous is because he's not a man of faith.
yeah,
He's not necessarily, like, he talks about discovering
God
God
after the
after the
apocalypse.
apocalypse, and to me that almost feels like something that, say, like JD Vance would say, where it's like he's more of an opportunist than he is truly a
Sure.
man of faith or belief in any way, where it's like, okay, well, I can manipulate people,
To
in
do what
order to
I kind of
survive
want and yeah, to
myself. Yeah.
survive longer, right?
And he's
Yeah, because
smart enough because he has an educated background where he can take people that maybe don't have that and, you know, twist their thoughts and their minds in a way
yeah.
that's
Does he
very
say
much
he's a
cult.
school teacher? Is that what
Yes,
it
yeah.
is? Yeah, which is even more fucked up with what happens later. So,
Hey man, school
um,
teachers are underpaid.
yeah, God.
And
So
I
they
I
kind of
just
have
like the
this.
idea quickly of, like, as all of this is going on, what probably really is happening with, like, Pedro Pascal is that he's shooting one of his 9 other projects that he's working on.
So they have to do this episode where he's kind of not in it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why they did episode 3 as well. Um, he randomly wears a helmet for the whole series. Um, Yeah, so they have this kind of back and forth, and then through this dialogue, you get kind of a fun reveal with David. He kind of puts together who Ellie is and who she might be with. And then there's a reveal from, we already mentioned that there's a man that was killed earlier when they were going out to look for food. That was the father of the young girl in the first scene. And then it's revealed here that that is one of the men Joel killed at the university, because David puts it together that this crazy man who killed some of his people was with a young girl at the school, and that kind of gets revealed during this conversation. So as that happens, James returns at that exact moment. David kind of says, "Put the gun down," to James because James is pointing the gun at Ellie. Um, and kind of for some reason uh, keeps his people from killing Ellie, and kind of wants to let her go and take the medicine. Basically not sort of using her as bait, I think, to try to find Joel, right? And
Yeah.
then still knows that Ellie is kind of innocent in this um situation, but then we'll see later that he had ulterior motives as well, so which is gets creepier and grosser too. So he lets Ellie go with the penicillin. So and then James is confused and he's like, don't worry, we'll find them later, kind of thing. So Ellie then, I think we cut to Ellie going back to Joel, right?
Yeah.
So she goes down, injects the penicillin.
She doesn't even know where exactly to inject it. Like
Yeah.
she's, because again, like the character is not a doctor, has never had any training in that way. So like even watching how the character, even just like takes the penicillin and where to put it, that's fascinating, because usually in most TV shows or movies, once the character gets, the vaccine, they're usually like, oh, I'll just, pull it out of the formula, and I'll tap the needle, and I'll stick it exactly where it needs to go. And I
Yeah.
like that this actually takes some time to be like, oh, well, yeah, she's not a doctor, she's not a nurse, she's not, it doesn't have any medical background, so this is basically a lucky situation in terms of how everything works out. But there's not a lot of movies and TV shows that actually take the time to do that, where somebody that is just literally flying by the seat of their pants and hope for the best gets it right.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a wrong place to inject penicillin. I know you're allergic, so am I. So I
Yeah.
don't know
Well, I
if
mean, we would be dead.
yeah, we'll see. Um
Anaphylactic shock.
exactly. That would be, yeah. She doesn't know Joel's allergic to penicillin. She's like, "Fuck." No, so she injects him with the penicillin. Actually, I'll get to my thoughts on kind of this episode at the end too, because I was going to jump into a point about this foreshadowing kind of the final episode and Joel's decision and things like that, of Ellie kind of the whole vaccine and then Joel saving. Yeah, we'll get to there
Yeah.
in the next episode. But then they have this kind of quite beautiful moment where there's always this kind of, father-daughter relationship kind of throughout the whole series, and they kept getting closer and closer each episode. But I think this episode really kind of, what I just mentioned, solidifies Joel's choices in the next episode, and really kind of as his, surrogate kind of daughter, and where she kind of cuddles up with him, and as she gives him the medicine and kind of sleeps beside him overnight. So then we cut back to David's camp, and I think this is where we kind of get the reveal. The cannibalism thing isn't confirmed until Ellie sees the ear when she's locked up, which we'll get to in a
But
second. But
something's up with, like, where'd they
yes,
get all that food and
that
like
deer meat, the deer meat,
deer
and
meat in
and
quotations?
exactly. So I think, again, unsuspecting people, I still think you probably don't realize. You might go, that's, everyone's acting a little bit weird, but you probably don't realize until the ear thing that they're eating people. But you do kind of see them cooking this stew, and someone comes up from downstairs and brings this big kind of thing of meat, and they go, oh, where'd we get that? Because
The gym mats.
at this point, David and James had not returned with the deer that Ellie shot. So they're like, oh, we had leftover venison. Like, and everyone's like, we were just talking this morning that we had no food left, and like, or only had a little bit. So that you kind of see everyone going, okay. And then knowing, even the first time I watched this, knowing exactly, you're like, oh, gross. Everyone's just eating this stew in this room. And
Yeah.
like, exactly what's
I think
happening.
if you're a
So
genre fan, you kind
you
of
kind of,
know what's
yeah.
going on at that point, because I mean, like, even like the way that they pay close attention to not only the eating, but the food itself and how it's prepared and how it's plated. These things kind of tell you through visual
Sure.
language what is
And even
going
the
on.
setting, and the setting, most apocalyptic stories have, the road, and, many things that The Last of Us is kind of even based off of, have cannibalistic elements and stuff like that. Cause it's just, I think, a very natural thing to explore.
I was gonna say
When
a natural thing to
um,
explore in life. But yeah,
in
in
no in an
post-apocalyptic story.
apocalyptic
But
situation when
there's
food
also
runs
the
out and
really great underrated pioneer horror movie called Ravenous with Guy Pearce, that also kind of looks at that, but it's not in the post-apocalypse. It's during like a pioneer time, and it's a bit of an oddity. And then also, you look at Cannibal the Musical, right? Like that. I mean, he's mocking
sure,
it, obviously, but like
yeah.
there's the voyage of time, like when settlers first came to a new land, that's where you had cannibalism, and then it's the end of the world where all the resources are gone and basically you're just eating each other.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry. I'm just messaging my wife back. Um, yeah, it's gross, but I definitely understand. Um, uh,
Yeah.
so at this point, we go to the dining hall where everyone's eating this human stew. And David and James come back with the deer and say that they caught a deer. So, or they killed a deer. So they'll have food for the next little while. Um, Everyone's kind of eating. Is James or someone else is like hesitant to eat because like they know what's going on, right?
They know what it is.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think they're kind of, they don't, yeah. And then,
But it goes
um,
back to the series as a whole, right? Because Joel has talked about before how you've done things in the past in order to survive that you're not proud of, and
totally.
that you've probably hurt people, and you're, in one timeline or another, you're the hero of a story, but then you're a villain in another.
Yeah.
So,
Which we
with this,
will
that's how it
explore in season 2, baby. Like,
Oh yeah.
I cannot wait for that. That'll be a large topic of conversation in season 2. Um, so David comes back, and then the young woman from the opening sequence, they mentioned Ellie, or he knows that rumors have already kind of spread that they found this girl who has this connection to the man that killed the guy they reference in the opening, who is the father of this young girl. So the young girl kind of speaks up against David and says we should kill Ellie and Joel. Basically saying like, you're wrong, we should do it this way, because he was the one who said we should keep her alive, or maybe she can be of use to us if we integrate her into our community and things like that. So this is where his kind of,
Neither choice is
yeah,
Christian, or neither choice is like God fearing. Like it's basically personal, you know, um, indulgence on David's part, and we'll come to see what that is as we move along. But then also, it's revenge. And so like that also shows you how, the religious outlook of things, because most religions are built on the idea of charity and compassion and kindness for others, but in a world where there is no hope, and faith is still providing some people with some form of comfort in terms of knowing, maybe, or thinking there's an afterlife or something more to this world, or we're being tested in a situation. And the leftovers in this case are not HBO's The Leftovers, but the leftovers of dear old dad from the last
she's
episode.
probably eating right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's just interesting in terms of how, like, as like little character moments, because we don't get to know a lot of the people within the community,
Yeah.
and so moments like that kind of help give you an idea of, like, this girl is only human, and she's still following a faith that probably initially started as something as being about peace, and is now, you know, talking about killing two people, to avenge her
And
father.
then the irony of him using violence and fear to kind of manipulate and control everyone, right? Like
Yeah, to dominate.
he goes over and slaps this young girl and says like, don't you ever talk back to me, essentially. Like, I'm the one in charge. And
Yeah, and that's the scene I was talking
yeah,
about. I thought it was earlier on, but it's now, and that's where it's like people in this has probably happened before, but like people probably know that David is capable of violence, but they're not saying or doing anything to counter that, and so like this kind of very out in the open, um, violence and sadism is basically accepted because I think everybody fears David or fears what could happen to them. And I almost wonder how many people do really know what the food is, and they're just telling themselves otherwise because they just don't want to believe it.
Yeah, I'd say that there's probably the way that he even knows that how information spreads quickly within the group, right? Like
Yeah, because if they know that there's a girl there that, and the guy, like, okay,
that means
well,
James went back and fucking opened his stupid mouth right away.
yeah. And it also says, like, okay, well then, like, how would they not know that they're eating somebody, even if it's not in this particular
'Cause
case, maybe there was an incident before,
depending on how many people are involved, because we do see that scene we'll get to later where Joel sees all the bodies strung up in the cold to keep them from rotting and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
But
It's a pioneer thing too,
mhm,
right? Because they didn't have refrigerators,
yeah,
or they don't have
they don't have
refrigerators.
power,
So
right?
they usually freeze them, or they put them like in salt. I'm not talking about human bodies. In this
Sure.
case, I'm talking about, like, fur trappers would take
Animal stuff. Yeah,
animals, and
yeah, for
yeah.
sure. So then he reveals to everyone that they'll go after Joel because he's the man who killed them, but Ellie he wants alive to bring back to their community. So David and his men go out to find Ellie. I think at this point, Ellie goes out. She was gonna go hunting again, I think, on the horse, or does she hear
Yeah.
them or something? I forget. But
Well, they're following the tracks,
yes,
right?
because
Because
it's all in the snow
she's
and
leading
yeah.
them. Yeah.
So they find out kind of where Ellie is. She gets out of the house before they find Joel, because I think in her mind is that they're gonna probably find her, but she doesn't wanna lead them to Joel because Joel is still basically almost in a coma. Like, he's still in the basement, barely able to move.
He's still
So
shooting his other 9 movies.
exactly. So, she goes out on the horse, kind of shoots her gun off and lures them away to chase her. Um, James then, kind of chases after Ellie. He shoots her horse. Ellie kind of falls off the horse and is dazed. Um, James and the other men of David's crew are about to kill Ellie, and then David stops them from doing that and wants to take her back to their compound kind of thing. So at this point, Joel's still not awake, right? Like, they're still looking for Joel, but they take Ellie back to the resort.
He's kind of coming in and out of consciousness at this
Yeah.
point, like, 'cause I
I
think
think he can kind of hear
what
what's
it's
going on outside, but
yeah, the medicine is working, but it's still, like, slow. He's groggy, he's out of it. But I just wanna go back to
yeah,
Ellie
please.
falling
Yeah.
off the horse. I think, like, that's an important thing here because it makes sense, because this character is still in a place where she's learning, and even though she's learned a lot since episode 1, the character isn't Rambo or Arnold Schwarzenegger, or John Wick. And what I always find really odd about those movies, and I was watching this and this also dates the episode now, because watching A Working Man, it's like you create these people that are indestructible, but then you have to have, like, a scene where the villain gets the better of them.
Yeah.
And I never believe it for an instant that everything else you've shown me in the movie, the character gets out of the situation and dispatches the villains so quickly. Like with A Working Man, there's a scene where Jason Statham's character, who's, like, literally destroyed every single person he's come into contact with up until these two kind of goofy Russian brothers put him in the back of a van, and, like, they got him. And you're just like, no. It's the same thing with John Wick when like, the house invasion in the
Sure.
first movie happens, and it's like, okay, so you're telling me that this moment here is, you know, couldn't get out of the situation and couldn't save the
But now he
dog,
can kill
and
300 people and with
yeah, and you could argue, oh well, in John Wick's case, he's rusty, but it's like, okay, well, if he's rusty, why isn't it more like Nobody, when Bob Odenkirk was kind of, like, slowly getting back into things? Like, for the most part, everything else in that movie, in John Wick, feels like, okay, he's just ready to go. What I like about this, going back to The Last of Us, is that, okay, Ellie's not a crime fighter or action hero,
not at all. Yeah.
and for that to happen to the character, and for the character to eventually be captured, there's more believability there. There's more suspense there than, say, watching, even another movie like this, where you put, like, a big name actor in this role. They're going to be fine, and that it's like you're just waiting for the next beat to happen where they untie
Well, she's
themselves
a
or
young
find the
girl
thing that
too,
they need.
right? So like it's I think being a young
Yeah.
woman and with all these men kind of I think adds a layer of kind of unsettling and an unsettling nature, and you
Well,
don't.
they're predators,
Yeah,
right? In that
exactly.
way. Like David will come to know as like truly a horrible, heinous predator, but they're different types of predators. Like some of them are predators in the sense of, they want vengeance, and so they want to kill. Some of them want to eat. So those are
Yeah.
predators. David's specificity of a predator is probably the most loathsome of the bunch in terms of, what we're thinking of in terms of what we need to survive or who we are as people. We talk about a wolf hiding in sheep's clothing. David is that. David
Yes.
very much is the monster pretending he is the good person. And I think that's also just an interesting aspect of this episode.
And even if you know that there's a Last of Us Part 2 video game where you've seen Ellie on the cover, you still I don't think it's this. I agree with you that it's not the same where you never feel like she's in danger or anything like that, because even this whole thing, like incredibly traumatic things happen to this young girl, right?
Yeah.
To my point earlier of her having to kind of this coming of age moment, this really fucked up having to now, we'll get to it, brutally murder this dude to kind of escape his kind of fucked up, like you said, predatory kind of things that he's doing. So it's yeah, I agree with you that it's you. It's not like you think, oh well, Joel and Ellie are the lead characters. Like that everything's going to be okay. I feel like the show does a great job of not knowing what the hell is going to happen each episode, and any character can kind of go at any point. So then this leads perfectly into what you're saying of Ellie wakes up in a cage at David's resort. And
Come to
uh
David's
yeah,
resort.
she wakes up
We've
in a
got
cage
5-star dining.
and realizes, he says it's like, "Oh, we're just doing it because like, I to protect you right now," kind of thing. But she's like, "You put me in a fucking cage." And then they have this back and forth where he kind of reveals that he wants her to be his like child bride, kind of, and not
Going back
kind
to
of.
the pioneer
I'm
times.
pretty sure that's exactly what he says. He's like, "Oh, I see. I need an equal. I want you to be with me. Like we could." And it's just very strange and very weird um and very uncomfortable. And this is where um we learned that it's explicitly shown that they're resorting to cannibalism because Ellie sees the ear.
Yeah.
She sees full res dogs on the ground. And then
Lend me your ear, Kirk Blitz.
so
Who's the cop in
yeah.
Reservoir Dogs, Kirk
Um
Blitz.
so he kind of they have this kind of back and forth, and she basically tells him to go fuck himself and that she's gonna kill him or whatever, and like she's gonna get out of there. Um and he kind of leaves her there. Then we cut back to Joel, who now, or the men are kind of closing in on Joel, right? We cut back to David's men who are searching for Joel. They're going through house to house, door to door to kind of find him. Then we see a man who goes into the house where Joel and Ellie were, goes down to the basement. You think he's going to see, Joel in a coma on the ground. And I love the show, and I love
This is
Joel.
where the cliche
Yeah,
comes into
this is
play.
like I love the video game, I love the show, but this is where you're like, that penicillin worked pretty quickly." And you're like, and I know a penicillin can work quickly and it would help the infection, but this man goes from being on death's door to absolutely murdering everyone. And it's not John Wick-esque. He's still, pretty
But it
slow
still
and
feels
like,
almost like an action cliche
yeah.
where it's like, it's a fake out moment, right? Where it's like, you've been told that this is where Joel has been the whole episode, and he's in a really bad state right now. And so when we have these characters coming in and it's like, oh no, you're creating suspense. I think most people kind of know like it's going to be fine for him, but like the
Sure.
way that it does feel like, okay, this is where we are falling into like a trope
And a
here. Like
suspension of disbelief moment where you're like, okay, I
yeah,
guess I can believe that the penicillin worked enough where he would have enough energy to overpower 7 dudes and stab them all in the back of the neck and stuff like that. And like,
well, he hasn't eaten
and
anything in a long
yeah,
time as well, right? Because calories are important in terms of, like the more you burn off calories in terms of fighting off an illness, like
sure.
how much energy do you have
I
to
totally
do
agree, but it
anything?
is one of those things you're like, all right, well, I guess I'll let it pass kind of thing. You're just like, it's
Yeah.
not that big of a deal, but it does have that moment of going, okay, he was literally looking like he was on death's door 2 seconds ago. So he goes and starts killing these guys one by one. Do we get I think we just go straight into the interrogation scene, right? Which is one of the more brutal scenes of the
Yes.
series. So Joel, after killing a bunch of David's men, captures 2 of them. We then open up on a scene where Joel has one man tied to a chair and another man kind of tied up in the corner, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm in the corner watching you kill him.
yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. So, and absolutely, we see Joel's kind of brutal side, and I think because he's been with Ellie for most of the series, we've seen Joel be brutal in other moments, but I feel like this is that Joel that we skipped over in between the moment Sarah, his daughter, died, and when we meet him in the series, because there's this whole gap in his history where we know he did some pretty fucked up stuff and he wasn't a great guy, and
And he's desperate.
and
He
yeah,
doesn't wanna lose another daughter.
exactly. So, he interrogates both these men. It just starts right off the bat of him just fucking stabbing one guy in the kneecap and like
Yeah.
tied to the chair and just goes, "Tell me where we are and tell me where where you took Ellie, essentially. And it better be the exact same 2 points on this map that your friend over there tells me, or I'm going to kill you." So then the guy, he puts the knife in the dude's mouth that's all bloody at the end, and he pokes the parts where Joel is supposed to go to find Ellie. And then, in a typical interrogation scene, you double check the information with the other guy. No, he just straight up fucking stabs the one guy in the heart. And then the other guy's like, "What the fuck, man? Like, no, no, no." And then he goes, "I believe him," and then just fucking bashes his brain in with like a lead pipe. So pretty crazy.
Joel just, that penicillin just went,
Just, yeah,
got into
exactly.
him, and he was
Yeah.
just like, "You know what? I'm gonna trade." That would be funnier. Like if it was a comedy, we'd just be like, "Oh, I'll just take these dead bodies and trade them for Ellie because now David's got food for the rest of the
Yeah, I
winter."
know. Well, then you go, yeah, like if people didn't die of natural causes, like is he killing the people off in his community? Is that
I'm
part of it
sure
too?
he's probably,
Yeah,
or like maybe somebody that is sick, or like there's that story about the lottery where every year, not that it's about feeding somebody, but it's about sacrifice in
yeah,
order to, you know
for the greater good or
about
something.
routine and ritual, right? Where like one person every year has to be stoned to death by picking, the unlucky number from the bin, and it doesn't matter who it is, but it also seems archaic because nothing happens, but you do it
Yeah,
anyways. I mean, there's a reason for doing it here because it's about surviving, it's about feeding yourself,
yeah,
but there's also the feeling of like, okay, these characters, are so submissive to David that either like I we were talking about it before. I really do think there probably are more people that do know
sure.
what's going on, but just
You
either
have to, I think, right? By the
just don't care because they just want to save themselves. And so in order to do that, it's like, okay, well, I'll eat whatever or I'll play along because I don't want to be the one that is being eaten next week if I say
exactly, yeah.
anything.
That's exactly it. I forgot to mention that Ellie does break David's finger in that sequence as well. So he reaches in
Yeah,
and
she
she
does.
busts his finger, and then a great performance by Bella Ramsey just screaming at him as he leaves the room.
A good
Um,
finger break. That's it's
oh
it
yeah.
it's pretty
Oh
visceral.
yeah.
Like I think that's actually more effective than like pulling out someone's nails in
Yeah,
a
when you
torture
see
scene.
the
Like I think
finger just go sideways as
yeah.
someone's doing it, and it's a great effect to do because it's probably pretty easy to do.
Even in comedy, like a
Yeah.
show we'll be talking about,
Yeah.
coming up soon.
Yeah. God. Um Uh, so Ellie then, so David and James come in and because Ellie's not complying with his weird, um, predatory, pedophilic kind of weirdo, child bride
You're
kind of
waiting
stuff.
for David Hansen
Um,
to come in and say,
yeah,
To Catch a
yeah.
Predator.
So James and David pull Ellie out of the cage, and attempt to strap her on the table where they have seemingly be butchering the other people to eat. So you assume that that's what they're going to do with her.
Soylent Green situation.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Ellie is able to kind of fight them off, grab the butcher knife from David, stab it into James' neck. So that's a wrap on the original Joel, Troy
Yep.
Baker's cameo. James has a butcher knife in his neck. And then she kind of fights off David and runs into the cabin or kind of the resort lodge kind of thing, right? A
Yes.
fire has started. I forget how the fire starts. Do you remember? I think just someone knocks
I
over
think
one of
it's
the pots or
yeah.
something like that.
That usually is another kind of cliche kind of thing in these movies or TV shows where there's a fight and usually something is knocked over and it starts a fire or something collapses. It's usually in the moment unless it's deliberate.
Yeah.
In this case, I think it was by
Yeah,
accident.
I forget
Um,
exactly what happens, but it's a pretty iconic. So this
but where's everybody else at this point though? Like that's the thing
that's
I was
another
kind of
good
questioning.
question.
Like where are the other
I'm
villagers?
assuming
Like have
because
they been
this is a big like resort that this lodge is where they've secretly kept the dead people to butcher and stuff like that, and maybe it's not a place most people go or anything like that.
right?
But it does seem like that's where they're cooking things.
Well, I thought that's where they were all going to
Yeah,
eat,
I thought so maybe too, but
like a
maybe just
communion
where they go to eat
almost.
and it's not lunchtime yet or dinner time, so they're just somewhere else. I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's like a lot of them, right?
No,
But there's a
but there
fair
was enough
amount,
to be
yeah.
like,
It's not like
yeah,
Jackson or anything that we see with Tommy and stuff like that, at least at this point. So, then, this is a for people who played the game know, but in the game, this is one of the biggest kind of, it sounds corny to put it in this way, but boss fights, like boss battles in the game.
not the final
Like,
boss like The
no,
Rock.
David is one of the most iconic, boss things because in the game, the building's on fire and you kind of have this grid-like sequence where you have to sneak around and there's broken glass on the ground. So if Ellie, and this was a big deal in the game because you're playing as Ellie. The rest of the video game you've been playing as Joel. So when Joel's incapacitated in the game, it's slightly different than in the show. You think he's dead because this whole time, you've been playing as Ellie and it's not revealed that Joel's alive until a bit later. But it's an iconic boss fight where you have to kind of run around and distract David and throw something to distract him and come up with him and get a couple shots on him. And then very similar in the show, just condensed. You have Ellie kind of fight him off.
And how does he look in the video game version? I'm
He
curious
looks
about
like,
that.
oh my God, the actor. Why am I blanking? I'm gonna
David Dastmalchian?
No, I have an exact actor in my head that he looks exactly like, and my brain is mush, but I'm gonna have John Hawkes. He looks like
John
he
Hawkes.
looks just like John Hawkes, and he's played by Nolan North in the game, who is from another Naughty Dog
Drake.
video game, Nathan Drake from Uncharted. So that was kind of the Troy Baker, Nolan North kind of in this very dark, fucked up kind of thing in this. So he looks exactly like John Hawkes. Like John Hawkes would have been perfect if you're casting exactly how they look in the game, but
Right.
and even sounds like him and stuff. They definitely, I think, based it off John Hawkes. At least that was always my thinking. So we have this moment where Ellie fights off David. I do like
Well,
this.
isn't there, did we miss the part where like she kind of confuses him for a minute where she tells David that he's infected
Yes, sorry,
because
that was on the table. Sorry, thank you for that
yeah,
clarification. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Eric. So I skimmed over that. How she fights them off is that she tells them she is infected. So it kind of confuses them in the moment because they're about to kill her and want to eat her, and she's saying, you shouldn't eat me because I'm infected, and then shows
Yeah.
them the bite on her arm. They're a bit confused, being like, she would have turned by now. Why hasn't she turned? And she uses that to her advantage, and then that's how she gets the butcher knife and kills James. So thank you. Yes, Eric, that's a great
Yeah.
point. But she does fight off David. Again, I like that they just this is Ellie's moment. She has to do this herself. Like, Joel doesn't come in and save the day or anything like that. But you can tell that he really cares and he's trying to find her. So David is going to kill. No, Ellie actually causes the fire, I think, to distract David. Like, it's kind of to make him be like, it just makes it harder for him to find her. And I think that's the same in the game. Um, and then they have this brutal confrontation where he's this, man who's pinned down this young girl, and he says a bunch of really creepy shit. And he says this is the part he enjoys the most and stuff like that. And you're like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? And then, she ends up being able to, take the butcher knife, which is just out of her reach. And she repeatedly, basically caves his head in, with
Carves him a new
carves
one.
him, yeah, with this butcher knife. And I respect the show for being very brutal and very violent, but not resulting in like an unnecessary kind of splatterfest, gore fest. Like, it's very visceral. It's very
It's not a
disturbing, but
grindhouse movie.
exactly, like, you don't necessarily need to see the gore of her doing this, but it's off screen, and the blood does a lot of the work on her face as she's this intense performance, killing David. And it is this moment. She's a young girl through, like, I think, is this her first kill, or yeah, I think so, right? Because I think she doesn't she shoot someone maybe in an earlier scene, but Joel maybe stops her. I'm a little bit fuzzy, but I think
Yeah, because Joel has done most of sort of like he's kind of shielded her as much as he can, or at least he's kind of kept her from like she's
there's the
seen
moment
awful
in
things.
Pittsburgh, right? Wasn't there, like, where she had, like, I remember the moment in Pittsburgh as they're fighting off people, or I might be wrong, but
Well, I mean, at least it's not as and somebody listening to this, if they're listening to this, will correct us, but it's not as close
yes,
quarters,
it's not
right?
as
Like it's not
yes, she might have shot
like
someone, but I forget if this was her first kill or if it's just this moment where she's in this world and she has to fend for herself, and it's brutal and violent, and she has to do this herself, and this is the only way she feels like she can get out of this situation. And
she's actually causing someone else pain to the point of ending their life. She's seen horrible things before
but
this.
she's
Like,
never had to
you know,
commit them herself, I think.
no,
So I think
no.
this is being a young woman, like a very obviously traumatic turning point in her life, I think, right? So
Well, just
um
realizing that this is what the real world is now, right? Because this character has lived in, an academy setting and been sort of brainwashed to believe one thing and protected by sort of a gated community for so long that, over the course of this journey, she has seen a lot of death and destruction and the horrors that humanity has to offer, but hasn't been the one that necessarily has, you know, inflicted that pain on somebody else or has ended somebody else's life in that way that is so, visceral and just like, you feel it because you are like, it's not like, if you're shooting somebody, it's still awful, but at
yeah.
least there's distance,
Yeah.
right? Where this is like literally you are like carving into somebody, you are stabbing somebody to death. So, this is, you said coming of age moment. It's a moment of realizing this is what the world is,
Exactly. Yeah.
and this is not what she learned in the manuals and texts and like her training. Nothing can prepare Ellie for any
For
of
the
this.
horrors of what this world actually, like,
Yeah.
brings and things like that. So Ellie stumbles out of the cabin, or lodge, as it's on fire after killing David. And then Joel finds her as she's kind of disoriented because of this thing that she just had to do. And Joel holds her, and I believe this is the first time he calls her baby girl, which is, I think, what he called his daughter, Sarah. So I think it was like solidifies kind of this father daughter kind of bond that they have.
And it was also to let you know that that's one movie he was not in, Baby Girl.
Yes, that came out in the couple year gap in between these two
Yeah.
episodes that we've done. So yeah, I think a great like moment between the two, and I think like everything kind of builds to, you know, this penultimate episode of them solidifying this bond. And I think this moment of Ellie going through all of this, even just to save Joel, I think solidifies some of the things we're going to see um uh in the next episode, and obviously into season 2. So it kind of
Well, Ellie can also maybe understand now a little bit more of where Joel's coming from. You know, maybe she doesn't always still agree with like his methods or his tactics, but you know, given the number of years Joel has been doing this and has been surviving and having to make life or death decisions that are not morally,
yeah.
you know, that are morally questionable, it feels as though like maybe Ellie now at least can not even relate, but just it's like, okay, she has a better understanding of like what people are like in this world. And, you know, you have to have your guard up, or, you know, you can't trust really anybody, because there is this feeling of Ellie throughout this whole story has been a little bit more open to accepting people, or, you know, at least creating a dialogue or discussion with them, where Joel is someone where he's like, keep to yourself, keep moving, you know, don't get involved anywhere or with anyone, or even try to, you know, make contact.
Yeah.
And so after all of this, you know, you wonder how significant of a role this is going to play, not only in the finale, which we have already seen, but you know, this is really kind of going to shape that character moving forward, you know, in terms of how the character approaches violence
Yeah.
and trust and community. And so like it's an impactful episode in that way. And even though it is, we were talking before, like it's episodic, and that it's like it's another kind of like
But still very character focused, right? Yeah.
yeah, like you never feel like it's just like simply like plot driven, or it's telling you, you know, you have to get, like if it was more plot driven, it would have Ellie having maybe to do more things in order to get the penicillin. You know, it'd be like, oh, you have to do this, and in order to barter with this person, you have to get them this because they want that. And that's where almost it would be like gameplay, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, you're trading things, or you're having to do other side missions in order to get the thing that you need. It's all based on like, okay, the character is coming into their own. They're figuring out now that this is what the reality of the world is, and what, you know, Joel has been talking about this whole time, and how he's always very much, you know, stoic and grizzled and broken. And you kind of understand like, yeah, like if you have survived this long, you probably have done something or a series of things that you're not particularly, you know, um proud about in
Yeah.
terms of, you know, having to survive. But it's not a time or a world where you can simply go to therapy, or, you know, talk to somebody. Like you just basically bottle it up and move on, and it's probably screwed up everybody that is a survivor. Like I wouldn't be surprised if every single person in, you know, the camp that Tommy's in have done things in their past. Like every character feels like, you know, they probably have their own stories in terms of how they got to where they are, and they're probably not all pleasant.
And they all have reasons for why they did things too, right? And that kind of will come into play. And that your past doesn't just, you know, your past will always come back, right?
It always comes back
Yeah,
to haunt you
exactly.
in some way or another. Or it's like the whole thing of karma,
Yeah.
right? You know?
I thought it was a great episode. I thought Scott Shepherd, excellently cast, a wonderful kind of guest appearance, which the show has done such a good job with, of like having, you know, kind of these one-off, you know, guest appearances from people, and everyone being excellent in those roles. So whether they're from the game, like Troy Baker, I thought did a great job as James, you know, kind of a smaller, you know, subdued kind of performance, but holds his own. And for people who know that that's Joel from the games, that's kind of fun. Um, and Scott Shepherd's great, and Bella Ramsey just absolutely crushes it in this episode. So I thought it was a great penultimate episode, and to a lot of the points you just said,
Penultimate or penicillin.
yeah, sets up a lot of the themes that we explore not only in the finale, but moving forward as well. I really do think it's a turning point for that character and how
Yes.
she kind of,
It's Ellie's
yeah.
episode. It really is. Like like Ellie has always been present and beside Joel through this whole thing. But this is where, and I guess because of where we're going, I mean, I haven't played the game, but I know where The Last of Us 2 is going. And maybe if the creators of this show or of the video game maybe had early ideas of doing a sequel, you have to establish, well, Ellie has to move past Joel, right? And move on and move in her own direction.
Yeah, I'm
So
assuming they knew they wanted her to be the playable character in part 2, and then teasing that with her being playable in the video game, this being an episode where she has her first brutal kill, right? And then also her being the main character, which moving forward, it kind of does, obviously Joel and Ellie are equal parts in this story, but it does, after this moment, start to tend more towards Ellie and her being the lead, where Joel is more of a supporting role, right? But yeah, we'll see that in the finale, and then no spoilers, obviously we won't spoil anything that happens in Last of Us Part 2. Each episode we're just going to be talking about what happens in that episode, maybe tease a little things for the next episode. At this point, you all have probably watched season 1, and maybe you're catching up, or you're revisiting it like we have as well. So you're probably pretty stoked for season 2 like we are, but we will cover episode 9, the finale of season 1, next week, which will be the week before Last of Us part 2 premieres on HBO and Max and Crave.
it's like no
here in
time has
Canada.
passed, right?
Hey, you know what? This is
We've just gone from season 1 to season 2.
yeah, I know. I'm jealous of those people. Like my mom, who just watched Severance season 1
Yeah.
and 2. They never watched the
Oh,
first
they don't
season.
have that.
They don't have that
because they haven't
3-year
waited in
gap.
real time.
I got messages from my mom, and she also watches The Last of Us, so I'm excited for her to watch season 2 as well. But with Severance, there was a 3-year gap in between season 1 and season 2, and I think season 2 really took over kind of the cultural kind of zeitgeist and stuff, and everyone was talking about Severance, and then even people who
And it's a weekly thing too, right?
it is,
I
man. A
think,
lot of the
that's
shows, White Lotus, Severance, Last of Us, what other shows have been popping off? Everyone says The
I
Pit is
know
amazing.
Adolescence has become a big thing, but
Adolescence,
Netflix,
yeah.
like, they release everything at once, where like Apple was really smart with Severance, and I think
A
they're
studio and
the studio as well, where you continually have the show and the cultural, conversation, even
and HBO are the
when it's
kings
off
at that.
air,
Yeah.
you know,
HBO is
or Max as they're now
well,
known
yeah.
as.
I'll still say HBO, but HBO kind of, they were the appointment viewing on Sunday nights, and they still
Yep.
are, right? So I think when you look at the Apples and even Disney Plus to an extent, Andor's coming back, which I know doesn't give them huge ratings, but I know that there's passionate people who really, really love that show, and we're very excited for it. But like those weekly, you're seeing even with The Pit, which is a Max show, you're seeing it with White Lotus, you're seeing it with Severance, you're seeing this weekly appointment viewing, and we're in like peak TV again right now too, because I've watched so much TV over the last 3 months, because the movies I feel like have been a little lackluster. So
Other than Black Bag and Mickey 17.
yeah, and Looney Tunes is great too, and stuff like that. But yeah, we're in peak TV, going from White Lotus straight into Last of Us, going from Severance straight into the studio. Like there's so much really, really good stuff on right now, and this is making me very excited for Last of Us Part 2. Like going back and watching these final couple episodes, and even though I know the video game inside and out, I know the series I've watched 2 or 3 times now, so like I know it pretty well, but I'm very excited to jump in and watch season 2 and kind of do these weekly breakdowns with you. So it'll be very, very exciting. We will complete them this time, and we will do them each week. We're going to aim for Mondays, but because of it airing on Sunday nights and how much we can record beforehand, we'll try to get them out as soon as possible, but you're looking at probably Monday or Tuesdays, something like that. We'll try to get them out. We'd love to get them out Sunday nights for you, but we're having inside baseball stuff of some issues with the screeners, so I don't know how much we're going to be able to pre-record before the season comes out. So we're going to try our best though, but we're going to do one
We'll do
every week.
something though. We'll
We're going to do a review
something.
for sure. And we're going to
Yeah.
do at least episode 1 is going to be up that Sunday night. It's just moving forward each week. We're going to try to do as many as we can.
You're going to aim for the bushes.
Yeah. There goes my. Anyways, thank you all. We really appreciate it. And we apologize once again for this 2-year gap. I hope you understand that, mentally just wasn't in a great place, but I really do love this show. I really do love the game. It's one of my favorite video games of all time, both part 1 and part 2. One of my favorite universes to talk about. This is one of my favorite shows to do. It just unfortunately, sometimes you can't control your brain sometimes and had to take a little bit of a break, but I'm glad to be okay, and I'm glad and excited to be talking about The Last of Us. We'll be back next week, which is April. Oh my God, it's April already. April the 7th will be the next episode that we do next Monday.
In 2026, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. We'll do one episode every 3 years, and we'll finish this when we're on our deathbed later. So I really do appreciate if you guys did come back, or if you're listening for the first time. We really do appreciate it. Go check out our other show, which is called the Untitled Movie Podcast, where Eric and I just kind of review movies. Eric does interviews. We kind of just talk about sometimes trips that we've gone on that have anything tangentially related to movies. We talk about wrestling sometimes. Video games come up a lot. Video game
Well,
movies.
I'm going to mention something.
Please do.
Because I have an interview with prosthetic and makeup artist Steve Newburn coming up at the end of April. It won't be until the end of April, but he worked on Until Dawn, but also worked on episode 2 of The Last of Us, Infected.
Heck yeah.
So there's a nice tie-in there. It's a really good interview. Steve is super nice. He has such an amazing career. He's worked with everybody from Guillermo del Toro to Martin Scorsese and everyone in between. Chances are you have seen tons of his work. He's responsible for that Hereditary head.
Oh God, really?
Oh yeah, we get into that. So that's something where it's a nice tie-in where video game adaptations for the most part seem to be having a bit of a renaissance. In terms of quality. I don't know, the commercial aspect has always been there, I think, for a lot of these movies, but in the sense of actually having a critical success, I think is because of The Last of Us. I think The Last of Us is the one that broke the code, that figured it out how to, take something that, we're only still starting to see. And I know it's been 2 years, but it does feel like, okay, and we'll talk probably more about IP in the studio, but it does feel like there is this attention now to rebooting video game adaptations in a way that we haven't seen before.
A little bit more faithfully too, right? I think before, it was just a name that they were selling to.
Or not overcomplicating things, or making something, taking a property and turning you look at the Super Mario Brothers movie, or Max Payne, and you think to yourself, why did they overdo it? What they could have just made a simple action adventure or revenge movie, but you just added too much.
Well, I also think that video game stories are getting better and better, so they're easier to adapt in a sense because the stories are already good, where for a long time it was more the gameplay was what you were there for, and the story was just to kind of piece the gameplay together. And Neil Druckmann even talks about that in a great interview with Alex Garland on the Sony Creator to Creator podcast. He talks about that exact thing, because Alex Garland talks about how he's a lover of video games and how he loved the Last of Us show. He thinks it's better than 28 Days Later, and that he's like, and talks about how games for so long were just, this, you weren't there for the story. And the Last of
God, Sony's probably like, don't
uh,
say that because we have 28 years
yeah,
later
I
coming
know, but
out.
he talks about obviously that many years have gone by and that he's actually inspired by The Last of Us now, even though The Last of Us
Yeah.
was inspired by 28 Days Later. Now 28 years later is inspired by The Last of Us, right? So it kind of is this full circle kind of thing that they talk about. And now we're a podcast talking about another podcast, but you guys should go check that out if you like this show and if you like Alex Garland's movies, because he is a video game fan, you can tell. And they do talk about not only The Last of Us, but also their new game Intergalactic, The Heretic Prophet. And it's a really fun interview. But yeah, they go specifically, Neil Druckmann talks about how, Alex Garland gives him his flowers of saying like The Last of Us was kind of that game for video games, to be like, these don't only have to be about a fun gameplay loop, right? Like you can tell a great story that is emotional and impactful in a different medium. And then there's a lot of other interesting things of how, you adapt a video game to a show or a movie where, a video game inherently you control the pace, and it's very different in the way that you have to kind of spread out the story beats, because gameplay has to still kind of be first. Where in a show, you don't necessarily, you don't have to show everything, or you don't have to do it in the same way because it's paced so differently. So there's a lot of good stuff there. You guys should check out that as
But you
well.
can also do things differently within adapting a film or a TV, version of the original source material, because that's something as well that you've talked a lot about on this show, where they have made changes from the game
Yeah.
to the series, because it's like, well, why? And this is something I even talked to Steve Newburn about, who's not a video game guy, but he was saying like with Until Dawn, and this is not spoiler or anything, it's just more so like, why would you want to go and see a movie that how it's going to play out completely, and like beat for beat? Like, you don't want just like the one-to-one all the time. You want to see like how this would work
I
in a different
I
medium.
agree with that. I always push back a little bit, because in the sense of, I get what you're saying, and that's a good middle ground, I think. But I always pushed back on the people who were like, well, what is the point if you're just telling the same story? And I go,
Well, that's what I mean. But what is the point of
I
telling this
I
same
push back
story?
because my mom would never play The Last of Us, right? So even if it was
No,
the
I
same,
get that.
but I understand that you wouldn't want to do that anyway. Like, that's not interesting to Neil Druckmann or even Craig Mazin, or to the creators of Until Dawn. I think you again, things play differently on film and on television, and I think
Well, the
that
mechanics are different, right,
that
from
whole
video game
and
play.
again, Neil goes into that whole Bill sequence in the video game and why he did that episode and how it was completely different. And because in the game, you're basically running away from zombies with Bill, and he has all these traps over town, and it was very gameplay focused, right? And his storytelling was all told through kind of exposition and kind of background stuff. And then, but they could do something different while telling the same Bill story essentially as in the game, but do it in a very different way that had way more impact than the game. And I think even,
And that was the best
yeah,
episode of
it
of this
is. Yeah,
series.
it is. And yeah, anyways, lots of good stuff. I can't wait to talk about the finale. I can't wait to talk about season 2. Yes. So rollout, we'll have episode 9, the finale of season 1 next week. In between, I don't know if we can say when embargo is. I forget. I got to read my embargo sheet again, but
We'll
like,
just say
we
season
will,
2 is coming soon,
and we
and we
will
will
have
be covering
we will
it.
be covering it, and we'll have a review at least of the series of season 1. We're going to try.
At least every year.
Yeah. And then we'll
Every
we'll
week
do
or
it. Yeah,
so.
yeah, exactly. So anyways, I cannot wait. One of my favorite things. So we really do appreciate it. Head over to our letterbox, which is untitled_movies. Follow us on all those social medias. I'm at Matt Rohrbeck. Eric is EM6211 or Eric Marchin, depending on the social media platform. You can check out all of Eric's interviews and reviews over on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. Anything else you want to plug, Eric, or?
Yeah, just again, be on the lookout. It won't be until the end of April, but the interview with Steve Newburn for Until Dawn is really worthwhile, especially if you are a lover of visual effects and practical effects and makeup. This guy has done it all. He's so kind. There's not an ounce of, you know, there's not like just like even like the slightest bit of arrogance in this guy. Like and he should be. He's done so much
Yeah.
great work, and so like if you are a lover of genre filmmaking, of video game adaptations, like this is something to be excited about, because it's rare that you get that much time to talk to somebody about the process of it all and the making of something, and especially that it ties in nicely with video game adaptations and video games in general, but also just with genre filmmaking, and a part of film that we don't really have a lot of conversations about, where you don't get to see the creatives, the artisans talk in this way. Like he's so open to having a conversation about anything and everything. And so when you do watch it, I think like, even if you're not there for until dawn, you'll get something out of it, because he's done so much, and we try to kind of cover a little bit of everything as we're having the conversation.
Awesome. Okay, until next time.
Would you eat me, Matt, if you had to?
That's such a gross thing to ask. Bye, everybody.